And again, if you're just joining us, I'm Jim Search, Education Coordinator at the Yale Peabody Museum. We're really happy to have you in this program, Backyard Birds. And I want to welcome you to the 25th Annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Legacy of Social and Environmental Justice, presented by the Yale Peabody Museum and the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. In partnership with the New Haven Museum, Students for Environmental Justice, the Schwartzman Center at Yale, and made possible with the exclusive partnership from Citizens Bank. Special thanks to Tiffany Holmes, Nandy Cummings, and the Yale Women's Network for inspiring today's event. So I just want to remind everybody that during the program, we'll have a presentation, and if you have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And so I want to welcome you all. Really great to have you again. And we have two bird experts that are going to be sharing their knowledge of backyard birds. Christoph Ziskowski, Collections Manager at the Yale Peabody Museum, and Tom Parlapiano, who is Manager of School and Teacher Engagement. So we're going to get started and have Tom kick us off with some of the examples of backyard birds that you'll be able to see in our area.
All right, we'll start again. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tom Parlapiano, and I'm a member of the education team here at the Yale Peabody Museum. I'm really excited to be here, actually physically, at Yale's West Campus at the museum's education center, which is where we will be doing all of our school programs, our adult education, our birthday parties, once we're able to meet in person again. And this is a really great facility, and I'm looking forward to all of you being able to come here for programs. But today we're going to be talking about birds in your backyard, which is a great topic because birding is one of my favorite things to do. In fact, I believe it's the second most popular outdoor activity in the United States, second only to gardening. There are about 400 different species of birds you can see here in Connecticut throughout the course of the year. But one of the things I love about birding is that the birds change with each season. And so winter is a great time to see some birds that you won't be able to see the rest of the year. Here's a migration map of North and South America, and it shows some of the migration routes between the two continents. In the springtime and in the summer, a lot of birds come up to Connecticut from South America, Central America, and the southern United States. But in the fall and the winter, those birds go back down south. And what happens is birds from further north, from Canada, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, move into Connecticut. And it's probably our only chance to see a lot of those birds throughout the year. Many of the birds you'll see in your backyard are birds that are resident, which means you can see them throughout the year. But again, in the wintertime, we can see some special birds. The different types of birds you can see are going to depend on what they eat and what you put out for them. So we're going to talk a little bit about bird feeders. There are different types of bird feeders that handle different types of food. And we'll look at a few of the more popular ones right now. This actually came off exhibit at the Peabody Museum at one point in time. This is a hopper feeder, and there's a cluster of house finches gathered around it feeding. A hopper feeder basically has a hopper, that middle part. You take the top off, you put the seed in the top, it goes down to the bottom and it comes out. The birds land on the shelf or platform on the bottom, and they feed. In this case, we have, like I say, a handful of house finches, and we'll be talking a little bit more about them later on. Certain birds will use this type of feeder more often than others, but probably the most popular feeder that you'll see out there is called a tube feeder. Called a tube feeder because it's basically a plastic tube. There's a cap on it and some perches and holes in the bottom. So you open it up, put your seed in the top. Birds land on the perches, stick their head in the hole, and they eat the seeds out of here. These are really popular feeders. They're very durable, and like I say, they're very popular throughout the area. But I'm going to show you kind of an up-armored version of this tube feeder. Here's a feeder from here at West Campus, and you can see the tube feeder on the inside, but this caging on the outside is here for a reason, and that is because even though you put out the food for the birds, very often squirrels will get to it. But this kind of a cage outside of the feeder will keep the squirrels away and also some bigger birds. So smaller birds will be able to get to the seed that you put out, and you'll actually be feeding the birds and not the squirrels. Another option is a suet feeder. This is a cage feeder for suet, which is beef fat. It's just basically a wire cage. You can purchase suet cakes like this at the store. You actually can make your own. Suet is just beef fat, but they also add seeds, sometimes mealworms and other things to the suet. You open up the cage, you put this inside here, and birds will land on the cage, grab on with their feet, and eat the suet from in between the holes in the cage. So this is a really popular feeder as well, very inexpensive too, and it's a way to offer food that some birds will eat that others won't, so you can attract a better variety of birds to your yard. Another variety of a suet feeder has this piece on the bottom, and that's specifically for woodpeckers. Woodpeckers will use suet feeders. They like to eat suet, but they will use this bottom part to balance their tail against. It helps them to hold on better. And so these are developed really mainly for woodpeckers, but other birds will use them as well. And last, and this was a new addition in my house just recently, is a window feeder. This is just clear plastic with suction cups. You attach it to your window, put seed in the tray, and believe it or not, the birds are they're not shy, so they'll come to a feeder like this after a couple of days. It might help a little bit to throw some seed on the ground underneath it to attract some ground feeding birds and clue the other birds in that there's food around. But this is another option. And last, but not least, this is one of my favorite feeders. You don't have to buy a feeder, you can make them as well. This is a craft project that I've done with a million summer campers and other visitors to the museum. It's a pine cone feeder. You just find a pine cone, get a pipe cleaner, twist it around the top, make a little hook out of the top, put some peanut butter on the pine cone, or you could use vegetable shortening if you want. And then if you have seed, you can roll it in seed. Otherwise, even just with peanut butter, you can hang it on a tree outside your window. The birds will find it. The squirrels may too. But in any case, you don't have to buy a feeder to feed the birds and to see them in the wintertime. There are plans online for lots of other feeders you can make using milk bottles, using soda bottles, all kinds of containers, and pine cone bird feeders as well. You can also make any number of different feeders out of wood. And so if you're interested in doing that, I'm sure that there are plenty of resources out there for you to look up. Now we're going to talk about some of the birds that can come to your backyard. We have a nice collection here in the education collection, not nearly what Christoph will be showing you later in the Vertebrate Zoology collection. But here are some common birds that you may see at your feeder if you put out some seed in your backyard. This bird gets its name from its color. It's one of the things I love about birds is that most of them, you can come up with the name just by describing it. This is an American goldfinch. It gets its name from its gold color. You can see that starkly black wing, the white wing bar across the wing, and the black on its forehead. This is the male bird. but this is not what they look like in the wintertime. Goldfinches are, I believe, the only bird that molts its feathers twice each year. Once in the springtime or late winter into its breeding plumage or this yellow color, and then another time in late summer going into fall into its winter plumage. Let me show you what that looks like. I'm putting on a glove for this one because this specimen is one of our older specimens. They're preserved sometimes with chemicals that I would really rather not touch. But they keep the birds from rotting, and they keep them preserved so that we can use them as educational specimens. So you can see that the color on this one is not that bright yellow. It's kind of an olivey color. Even the wings are faded. They're kind of a brown rather than black. And this is protective camouflage for the bird, so it doesn't, it's not too obvious in the wintertime. But at the end of the winter, you'll start to see yellow flecks in your goldfinches as springtime is coming. It's one of the great signs of spring. Finches have a kind of a conical or cone-shaped beak. They're seed eaters, and they'll eat sunflower seed. They'll also eat Niger and some smaller seeds. But black oil sunflower seed is probably the most commonly used seed for all kinds of birds. These come to my feeder, and that's what I put out. This will probably be, if you put out a feeder, this will probably be the first bird that comes to visit your feeder. Again, from its description, this is a black-capped chickadee. It has a black cap on top of its head and a black bib and a white cheek patch. They're very small birds, about, I think, 1/10 of an ounce, but they are really active. They're very curious. And if anyone has ever had an experience of a bird eating out of their hand, it probably was a chickadee, because they seem to be very used to people, or they get used to people very quickly. And they're great little birds. They're very active. And they get their name chickadee from their call. So sometimes you'll hear them before they arrive, especially first thing in the morning. You'll hear chickadee, chickadee, dee, dee, dee. And then they'll be popping around your feeder. These guys love to eat black oil sunflower seeds as well. They will also eat suet. And sometimes you'll see them picking out insect eggs and insects underneath the tree bark if you have trees in your yard or in the park nearby. Here are those house finches that we saw earlier. This is the male. It has that rosy or red color, almost a purplish color on its chest and head, and there's even a little spot on its butt. And the female is much more subdued in grays and browns anyway, not nearly as colorful as the male, which is usually the case for birds. Again, being in the finch family, you can see the beak on it. The beak is a seed-cracking bill, and these are seed eaters, as we saw from the bird feeder earlier. House finches are really not native to Connecticut. They were introduced. They were a Western bird, and they were introduced in Long Island, I believe, in 1940. And they were very successful and have spread all over the place. And one of the reasons they're called house finch is that they will nest near your house, like in your bushes. They'll also nest in hanging plants. I've even seen them make a nest inside of a porch light, provided there's a way in and out of it. So they're around a lot. If you keep your eyes open, you'll see these guys, and they'll visit in the wintertime and eat seed from your feeders. This is probably the #1 most recognizable bird in our area, maybe even in the United States. I believe it's the state bird of 7 different states. This is a northern cardinal. This is the male. It's bright red, and it stays red throughout the year. It has that black right around its beak and that really large beak for cracking seeds. This is another bird that will come to a variety of feeders. They like platform feeders or hopper feeders, but they don't mind too much landing on a tube feeder, the perch of a tube feeder, and eating seeds out of that. Again, black oil sunflower seeds are a favorite food of this bird. as well as many others. And when this bird shows up at your feeder, most of the other birds will probably disappear or at least move away. This is a blue jay, and they're well respected, we'll say, in the bird world. They're a fairly large bird. They will eat seeds, they will eat suet, they will eat a number of different things. But because of their size and because they're fairly bold, the smaller birds will move away and wait for the blue jay to eat before moving back into the feeder and eating some seeds. Blue jays are pretty amazing in that they can hold, one of the things they eat are acorns, and they can hold up to 4 acorns in their mouth at the same time. And it's recently, or at least fairly recently, been discovered that they will actually plant the acorns far away from where they gather them, and in that way help to propagate oak trees throughout the area. They will also eat sunflower seeds and a variety of food at your feeder. And lastly, two especially urban birds that you'll see throughout New Haven and the area. This bird is a house sparrow. It's European. I believe it's originally from England, and the European starling. House sparrows are seed eaters. They're actually a member of the finch family, and you can see that finch-like bill. So they'll eat seeds. They will eat on the ground. They'll also come to feeders and eat. Starlings will tend to eat suet if you put it out. And because they tend to travel in big flocks, once they come to your yard, they may eat a lot of your suet. So these are some of the really common birds that we have here in Connecticut and examples that we have in the education collection. But I'm going to turn it over now to Christoph to show you some really interesting birds from the Vertebrate Zoology collection.
Hello, my name is Christoph Zyskowski, and we're here in the Environmental Science Center, part of the Peabody Museum complex. And I'm going to continue with the survey of the birds that can come to your feeder. And let's maybe first look at some common birds. So I'm going to pick up at where Tom stopped and first talk about the suet feeders. And one interesting group of birds that you can get are nuthatches and woodpeckers. So what I'm holding here is a study skin of a white-breasted nuthatch. So these are the birds that creep on trees, on tree trunks like woodpeckers, but unlike woodpeckers, they can also do it upside down. So that's actually one of the interesting behavioral diagnostic features that you can use to identify them. And in addition to white-breasted nuthatch, if you're lucky and you are in a year where there is an eruption, you can get a related species called red-breasted nuthatch. This one nests farther north and relies heavily on crops of pine cones and other coniferous cones and their seeds. And in years where there are not too many where they live, when they would normally winter, they would come in big numbers further south. So this phenomenon, this kind of eruption, is what we're experiencing this year. And some people have already been reporting these at their feeders in Connecticut. So this is kind of a reward that you can experience if you pay attention to your feeder, and especially if you have both seed and suet feeder in your arsenal. If you have a suet, you can get woodpeckers visit your feeder, and here is the most beautiful species that you can see here in Connecticut at the feeder in winter. It's called red-bellied woodpecker. That's why I'm holding here this bird with its belly up, but it's not very easy to see. As you can imagine, if it's sitting on a trunk, it would be usually concealed. So many people ask us, why is this bird not called red-headed woodpecker? Because it has nice red crown. But there is actually one woodpecker farther south and farther west that has completely red head, and that one deserves that name. So this one really, you should remember, it's the red-bellied woodpecker. Another common species of woodpecker that you're likely to get that your suet feeder is a downy woodpecker. And this one I have here come together with its bigger, another species that is possible to see, but a little less commonly, is the hairy woodpecker. So downy and hairy. That is downy like down from a pillow and hairy like your hair. And in this case, the way to distinguish them is obviously the size if you see them together. But if you don't get to see them together, one reliable feature to look for is the size of the bill. How far does it project? And in case of the downy, you can see it's a very tiny bill, much shorter than the head. In the case of hairy woodpecker, it's often almost equal to the size of the head. And there are some other interesting features that you can see if you get to see them close. If you look at the tails, you can see that the hairy woodpecker tends to have tail feathers totally white without any bars, and that downy woodpecker has these black bars. So, and that's probably the easiest way to confirm that you have one of them. Another interesting bird that tries to overwinter in Connecticut increasingly, especially with the climate warming, is the Carolina wren. So here in Connecticut, in the summer, you would have it nesting everywhere together with the house wren and some other wrens in the marshes. But in winter, this is the only one that is able to survive and often comes to feeders, sometimes to suet. And the distinguishing characteristics of this one are that it's very kind of beige, buffy colored with more chestnut upper parts and very distinct eye line, supercilium as we call it. So that's something to look for when you feed your birds. And then Tom mentioned goldfinches, and that in winter they could be somewhat drab. So here's a goldfinch, young male, still black wing with the wing bars and some yellow. But I wanted to contrast it with another interesting bird that can show up at your feeder in the years of these eruptions, where the seed crop up north is poor. And that's a pine siskin. So this bird on the right is, you can see how much more streaky on the underside, still similar size, similar conical bill, and similar notched tail with some wing bars. So that's actually, if you see a goldfinch looking bird, but with a lot of streaking, this is very likely to the pine siskin. And if you are even more lucky, in a year like this one with the eruption of northern finches, you can possibly see a redpoll. So this is a common redpoll, male with beautiful red cap and black chin. And also, in this case, some streaking, but only restricted to the flanks. And again, the nice notched tail, if you can maybe see that, that's characteristic of these finches. And another bird that I wanted to bring up again is the house finch. So you've already learned from Tom that this is a bird that is introduced to the Northeast and very common, and males are the red and females are the brown. But in the years like this one, with the eruptions of northern finches, you can also get to see another related species, purple finch. And here I have a male on the left and a female on the right. Maybe let's look quickly at the females first. So you can actually already see how much difference there is in streaking, how much whiter and bolder the streaking, in this case, is on the purple finch. But the more interesting and easier way to tell them apart is by looking for this white supercilium, this eyebrow. And in this case, you see it here very well in the purple finch, but nothing in the house finch. It has very plain head. And the males are a little bit trickier, but house finch, you already can see that even beautiful red male would have quite a lot of streaking on the underside, and purple finch would have no streaking. So that's a good way to tell. But also, if you get to see a lot of these, you can actually see that they have different kind of red, that it's a warmer, kind of more orangey red, scarlet red on the house finch, and more pink, purple red on the purple finch. Hence the name. And another interesting bird to keep an eye, and probably very easy to get at your feeder, would be the junco. So juncos are black and white with especially this nice white outer tail, which shows up when they fly away from your feeder. Often they spread the tail briefly and show this flash of white. And the contrasting pale bill, that's another interesting feature to pay attention to. And then I'm going to finish this survey by showing you kind of the ultimate reward. If in a year like this one, we've already had reports of two quite rare fringillid finches, relatives of house finch, and these other redpolls and siskins that I showed you. And this is evening grosbeak and pine grosbeak. Grosbeak, of course, the name derives from this massive bill on both of them. And let me just show you how much bigger they are. So here is a house finch for comparison. And the pine grosbeak is a monster, giant compared to it. And so both of these birds have been seen this year, and including I've had somebody who had it at their feeder, our curator of birds, I can tell you, Rick Pram, had the evening grosbeak at his feeder in New Haven. So this is definitely possible this winter. They used to be much more common in the past, and now in the recent decades, they have been scarce. But again, this winter may be a chance to see an evening grosbeak at your feeder. And they would come to eat seeds, and pine grosbeaks both like the seeds, but also would show up on trees together with waxwings and on hawthorn and some other red berries. And I guess with this, maybe let me check on the situation with our questions. And is Jim monitoring this? And do I have more time to say a few
Hi,
more words?
Christoph. Hi, Christoph. Yes, you have a few more minutes.
Okay.
Can you tell me about what an eruption is again, and what's going on with that?
Exactly, great. So I mentioned that eruption is the kind of bird movement that is unpredictable. So that's why we just don't call it migration. So Tom told you about the regular, predictable migration routes and many birds moving along the coast southward in the fall and back north in the spring. But in the case of eruptions, this is usually related to food abundance or the lack of food. So for example, many of you may have heard of snowy owl eruptions. So in some years, here in Connecticut, we get unusual numbers of snowy owls appear. And this is thought to be related to the fact that in those years, up north, where they would normally winter, they have much less food, much less either rodents, lemmings, for example. And in the cases of these pine grosbeaks and relatives, these birds here, it usually would be seeds of pine cones or spruce or larch, these conifers for the north, because it turns out that they don't all produce the same crop every year. But in some years, there are definitely good years with a lot of it, in which case they would never show up this far south. But in some years when those cones are basically not produced, then those birds have no choice but to move out of that area and kind of wander. This kind of movement is more nomadic. And these are the eruptive migrants here that I'm showing. In addition to those that I show you so far, I have also examples of a couple crossbills. So that's another eruptive species of finch. And the name in this case is derived from the crossed bill. So here on this red crossbill, you may be able to see that the lower mandible crosses up over the upper mandible of the bill. And the same here on this second species, so that red crossbill on the left and white crossbill on the right. So we have, that's another bird that theoretically could show up at the feeders, but it's quite rare. Often it's more likely to just be seen feeding somewhere in the pine cones. Hammonasset is a great place here in the area where we used to, in some of those years where crossbills showed up in big numbers, sometimes there would be two species together feeding in the pine cones in Hammonasset.
Yeah, great. Christoph, Emmy was asking if goldfinches molt everywhere at the start of spring. She's from South Carolina, wasn't sure if it was just specific to Connecticut.
Yes, they definitely molt throughout their range, and there may be some shift in the timing. If you live further south, perhaps it happens a little earlier because it's probably regulated by the photoperiod, by the length of the day. But yes, they do lose their golden, some of the coloration for part of the year, and then molt again and regain the beautiful golden feathers.
That's great. So Celeste was saying she didn't have the name of the bird similar to the goldfinch in color. That was the pine siskin with the stripes on its belly. Yeah.
Yep.
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 Okay. Good. So we had, do you have any more to show us, or how are you doing?
Sure, I can take you to show you one thing that we are not featuring at the moment are all the sparrows that can show up at your feeder. So maybe let me show you just a few most common sparrows.
And I wanted to remind everybody while Christoph is getting that is to please put your, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, and we are going to allow a little bit of time at the end to answer some of these other questions that you've had. So please do.
Let's see. So here you have, we have a cabinet full of white-crowned sparrows. I'm just trying to find one representative. So here is a white-crowned sparrow, one of the species that would potentially show up at seed feeders here in Connecticut. And here, maybe this one, is an example of a closely related white-throated sparrow that actually shows that, as the name indicates, beautiful white throat, and also the fact that the crown is not pure white, but it's kind of browner, but it still has this, we'll call this coronal stripe or crown stripe. So these are two very common species to expect at your feeder. And the interesting phenomenon is that white-throated sparrow comes in two color morphs. Let me see if I can see here. Oh, here's maybe one. Oops. So sometimes they can have a white throat, but not very black striping on the head, but brown. So this is kind of a recent realization that these are full adult birds, not some immatures, and that's just what we call color morph.
And is the white-throated sparrow much more common than the white-crowned?
Yes, exactly. Thanks for pointing this out. So what you typically expect is to see a lot of white-throated sparrows, and white-crowned is a little less common here in Connecticut. I just wanted to show another species.
While Christoph is looking, I wanted to just mention that this is a world famous ornithology collection at the Yale Peabody Museum. These study skins, by the way, researchers come from around the world to study them and can learn more about birds and actually help protect them, which, by knowing where they fit and more about their habitat and the data were collected is very important to actually not only compare how they relate to one another, but also how they might be protected.
Yes, and just wanted to maybe show you here. This is American tree sparrow, another species that can show up in winter at your feeder, and something that nests far up in the Arctic of Canada and in Alaska. And here, just to follow what Jim just told you, this bird is a female connected in Hartford, West Hartford, Connecticut, on 20 November 1911. So we actually know about every single bird here, where they are from and when they were collected. The collection goes back 150 years, and so we can answer a lot of questions here about both science, but also things like how climate affects birds' presence or absence, how they change over time, and so on. Are there any other questions or requests?
I think that's specific to what you have been talking about. It's great. I'm gonna probably be answering or doing the Q&A in just a few minutes. Thanks so much, Christoph. I'm going to show folks a few resources that they might want to look at to get started for looking at birds. Really appreciate your presentation, and Tom as well. Thanks, Tom. Let me start my video, and there we go. And I'll share my screen. So this is just coming up in a few days, everyone, is the Great Backyard Bird Count. And that's happening on February 12th to 15th, as you can see here. And what it is, it's 4 days to actually go out and look at all the birds you might see, whether at your feeder, in your neighborhood, or on a special preserve. And this is done throughout the world. It's sponsored by the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, the National Audubon Society, and Birds Canada. So yeah, that's something, if you wanted to get involved, and you actually enter your data, it's free, and it helps scientists know, about where birds are in their populations, which is, it's pretty neat. Yeah, as I mentioned, done throughout the world. So there's just a few places and species and places where it's been done. Another citizen science program that relates to birds is called Project Feeder Watch. And what you're doing is you're setting up a feeder in your yard or apartment area, someplace that you can look out, and keeping track of the birds that you see at specific times. There's a data sheet, and what you do is you count, say if you had, 4 chickadees come in at one time, which is sometimes possible, to come into your feeder, or some house sparrows, you count the most number of a certain bird at the time. So if you have 4 chickadees and then you had 2 later on, the total for your count for that day would be 4. And you keep track of all the different species. And this project actually has helped scientists to know even more about behavior, some things that that birds were doing and how they are behaving at the feeders. So that's another cool program to get involved with. And lastly, there is a free bird app, which is called Merlin. You can actually download it to your smartphone or have it on your desktop. And so it's a really great way to identify birds. And say, for example, Christoph showed you a lot of sparrows, and if you would just answer questions, what color was the bird, and if it was brown, a lot of the sparrows are brown. LBJs, I call them, little brown jobs, kind of hard to identify, but this would help you to choose through the choices. So you might say it's brown, you found it on the ground, you identify the area where you live, and it will, gradually go to the specifics of what you might see in your area. So a really cool app to have if you're interested. So that's called Merlin. And let me escape out of here and stop my share. All right. Excuse me. Let's see. Okay. Just a sec, sorry. All right. Okay. So we have a couple of questions we're going to get to in just a sec. Okay. All right. Oops. Now, I don't know, did folks actually, if they were able to see those apps, but just I might have had, but if you didn't, it's so it was Merlin was the birding app, Project Feeder Watch, and also the Great Backyard Bird Count. So if you actually, they should be, if you entered in any of those names into your browser, you can come up with those. Let's go over a couple of questions. We really thank our presenters, and as we do that, first one here is Elizabeth's asking, do you think that migrations of birds began long ago as continents started to drift in North America, north and west? And, you know, certainly geology had something to do with it. Actually, I think migration really, what was one of the theories was the responsibility for how birds started their movements had to do with glaciation. And Tom or Christoph, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's that certainly was involved. That was a big part of it. So as the glaciers receded, a whole area of land area opened up for potential feeding of this huge amount of land, you know, that birds could take advantage of. So the next question was, what Connecticut winter birds live in Connecticut as the southern destination of their seasonal migrations? And Christoph, do you want to answer that question? If you're
Sure. Yes, that's basically what I was talking about. Many of the birds I mentioned here as kind of winter rarities. That's because that's the southernmost end of the range, and for some of them this is a normal area to winter. Things like let's say tree sparrow, the last one I showed you, the American tree sparrow. This would be the Arctic tundra bird that comes down regularly to winter this far south. And then some others like yellow-bellied sapsucker, let's say. It can winter from anywhere from here all the way to Florida, and even occasionally can show up in some Caribbean islands. So yeah, that differs species to species.
all right. And yeah, dark-eyed junco would be one, right, too? Or
Exactly. And in some cases, we have species that both nest and winter in Connecticut, even though they may be not the same individuals. So it could be found nesting in northern Connecticut, and in winter we see it throughout the state, but most of these birds are probably from farther north, from Canada or Maine.
Great. Tom, Ann's asking about 25 years ago, pesticides that were, you know, a really big problem, and in some cases still might be used today. They was the robin actually close to extinction from those? Do you know?
Wow, I don't know that.
Yeah.
That would be a surprise to me. I mean, because robins are just so common. I know I mean, it's kind of hard to judge because their numbers are so huge today in Connecticut, mainly, well, for a number of reasons, but a lot of it has to do with food sources in the wintertime, in particular things like bittersweet berries. So, I mean, I just think of robins as being so numerous, it would be hard to think of them as extinct, but I know of a number of other species that were impacted by pesticides and herbicides.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Like
yeah.
bald eagle.
Right. Right. Yeah. And some of the things that people might want to, they're trying to get rid of mice, and they might put in, you know, there might be some of those like things that have warfarin and can really hit hard some of the birds of prey, right? That might feed on them. The poisoned mice. Yeah. So, okay. Let's see. A question from Anne about, do you, if you start feeding, she's heard that you should never stop. And so I can answer that. And actually, that is somewhat of a myth. They actually, you can stop and start anytime. When you're feeding birds, for the most part, you're supplementing their diet. You know, they can find a lot of natural sources. The only time that I would say that it might be more important than others, if you had an ice storm that that totally covered over their seed sources, it might be a good time to feed. So yeah, let's see. Marion is, oh, here's one, Tom. Marion was asking, do window feeders might promote more birds that could fly into the window? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It can happen. I mean, what's important is to place the feeders away from windows. The other thing you can do, I know that for years you could either print out or you could buy these silhouettes of falcons that would stick, plastic ones that would stick to the window just so that it help the birds see that they're there. But a lot of it is just providing some distance between the feeders and the windows. Like, for example, you would never want to put a feeder like in an inside corner where on two sides there would be windows or walls. That would kind of be asking for trouble in terms of the birds.
Right.
But as long as you provide them an easy escape route and places also to hide, it's important to put feeders near perch areas like bushes or trees where the birds can go back and forth from the feeder to perch areas where they feel secure. Great.
And so maybe like on the feeder that you had that's right against the window, you might cover the other part of the window so that they might not fly through it or something in that case.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Okay, great. So Sally's been seeing more bald eagles in the Quinnipiac River in Fairhaven in Connecticut, which is the eagles are on the increase, which has been great, partly due to the not using pesticides. Some things like DDT was banned and other pesticides. So that's really a good thing that some of these magnificent birds of prey are rebounding. All right. So there was a question from, let's double check you, put it up here. Okay. Natasha is saying that she had seen red tanagers in southern Connecticut. And it's probably, if it's all red without the black wings, I would say that's a summer tanager, which are actually, it's a southern bird of oak forests, and they're a little bit more common down south and not as common here. They are seen occasionally. So that was a good sighting that she had seen. And Eli Christoph is asking, are there any owls in the collection?
Sorry, any what?
Any owls in the collection?
Wow. I could spend here.
You could have a whole nother program on that, right?
One thing that I mentioned, the snowy owl, I can maybe just show you quickly our snowy owl cabinet.
While he's doing that, there's a question about birds preserved. And, they were using some chemicals long ago, like arsenic and some things that, would be one reason why a lot of the folks like Christoph that are using their gloves because they want to be careful of that. So there have been some chemicals put on the, Jan was asking about that. So that's how come they can last. Okay.
So yes, this is here we got snowy owl. That's something that you can try to see this winter because there have been already a few reported in Connecticut along the coast. So here is the specimen from Fisher's Island in New York from 1938. And you can see that it's heavily barred, probably a young bird or a female, and here more consistent with adult male, very white bird with almost no barring.
Oh, interesting. The color has to do somewhat with whether they're male or female.
Yes, if you look at the collection, it's a lot of this kind of variation. So this is 150 years of collecting, and you can actually compare the birds. And that I would recommend that you try to go to the archives of City Birds. This is a local listserv where people report some of these owls, or just pay attention when you're in Hammonasset or in Stratford, Long Beach, I think was one of the last places where they were seen. So yes, owls are great to look for in winter, and some of them, like great horned owls, will soon start nesting. So this is also for them the time when they vocalize a lot. You can actually hear great horns and very soon barred as well, and find them.
Great. Yeah, good. So along the coast are a good places to see snowy owls. That's great. And so we had a question about, do you think that there's more eruptive species traveling from the north to stay here, diminished activity due to, are they here because of COVID or people not moving around as much? More has to do with the food crop up there failing. Isn't that right? Or
That's right, totally.
okay. Yeah. All right. So, and Emmy's asking about what kinds of birds of prey we can see around here. That's, Emmy, I would recommend going to a bird guide and getting the range maps too. And actually, that Merlin would have all those in the, all the birds of prey that you'd find in your area that you could see around here. So, yeah.
If I could just point out this bird I'm holding just for a second. This was one.
Oh, sure.
I didn't get to in my presentation, but it kind of ties in. We were talking about birds of prey. One bird you may wind up seeing in your backyard if you put out bird feeders that's completely unintentional is the sharp-shinned hawk. Sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks are members of the accipiter family. They're birds of prey that specifically will eat songbirds. So and because of the number of people who feed birds now, and because of the number of songbirds that are here in the wintertime, Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawk sightings in Connecticut in the winter have become much more common. And this is an example from our education collection. They don't, I'm not sure exactly the sort of detail you can see, but they don't have the powerful talons of a red-tailed hawk or an eagle, but their nails are long and narrow, and their feet are fairly fine but perfect for taking birds.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good point. And they have to eat too. So that's part of the circle of life. Yep. And Paula's asking about maintaining a bird bath. Do you want to answer that, Tom, or? I'm happy to jump in.
I think you can jump in. I have a bird bath. I know some people heat them, some people don't. I just put out water, and it just is what it is.
Right.
I know it's important. I mean, clearly, water is important to all life. But if you want to address that, Jim, that's great.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So important to do. You can maintain a bird bath through the winter. That you've seen those little trickly fountains. If the water is moving, it won't freeze, which is kind of nice. So you can do it that way, or you can purchase a heater, which just goes into the water, doesn't hurt the birds. It's important to keep your bird bath clean, even in the wintertime. So that is an important source for them. So they sometimes, when things freeze over, particularly, it's hard to get that. All right. So question more about snowy owls. Is it day or night when you see them? Actually, this is one owl that is diurnal. They hunt both in day and night, but it is one that will often be active during the day, and so that you can see them. They're often perching and kind of resting often during the day, but they also hunt as well. So it would be going to some of the coastal areas and looking around. Sometimes they're listed on the Connecticut bird list, which is through the Connecticut Ornithological Association, CT Birds. I think Christoph mentioned that. So, yeah. Question was, are seagulls or gulls prey for any birds? Yeah. Eagles will occasionally take gulls, bald eagles. They mostly eat fish, but occasionally they'll eat other birds. And as well as, believe it or not, snowy owls will. There was some research recently about snowy owls and their food sources. And occasionally some snowy owls were attacking ducks at night, which is interesting. But mostly for snowy owls, it would be rodents and so forth along the beach areas. And of course, where they nest in the tundra, it's small mammals primarily. So let's see. Can you talk about the importance of keeping cedars, bird feeders clean? And yes, it's very, very important to actually keep them clean. Every few weeks or so, empty your seed and use a weak bleach solution, because they can catch some problems and diseases from if they're kept dirty. So
there are also, I mean, certain seeds. For example, one of the advantages of using like a sunflower seed in the shell is that they keep a lot better and a lot longer than like an unshelled sunflower seed or some other food. I've also read a lot about suet and temperatures above freezing, but I generally, I mean, you certainly don't want to have suet out when it's warm weather, but temperatures around freezing, plus or minus 10 degrees or so, I don't see any problem with, and the birds certainly eat it up.
wow, yep, that's great. Okay, so folks, just to let you know, we have a few resources in the chat that you can see for the CT birds, as I mentioned, and so as well as other resources. So please do check your chat for any other resources that you'd like to copy down. Yeah, I have. I'm just seeing if there, before we finish here, any other questions in the chat. I don't see any here. We also have the links for the Great Backyard Bird Count and Project Feeder Watch in Merlin. The links are there. Yeah, so I think we're about ready to finish, and I want to thank Tom and Christoph for presenting today, and thank you all for attending. We have a whole lot of activities and programs as part of the MLK event still going on, so please check our website, www.peabody.yale.edu, and thanks everyone for attending.
Bye.